Hello parents, so you signed your children up for music lessons. What's next? Well, actually, this is just the beginning of a long process of discovery, which we hope will last a lifetime. Now, to make the most of your considerable investment in music lessons, there are a few things that you need to understand. There is only so much that your child can pick up in a lesson, maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, or an hour every week. The reality is that learning to play an instrument is a little bit like learning to speak a language. For you to progress in learning to speak a new language, you kind of like need to have that language all around. You need to be immersed in it, and you need to try your hands at actually speaking it. Sometimes you're going to try and speak the language and you're going to get the tenses wrong. You're going to be all tongue-tied, struggling to pronounce the words accurately. Think of a baby learning to speak. Okay, and so your child's journey, really the progress, the rate of progress that your child will make really depends on how much effort they put into learning that language of music in between the lessons. So what the lessons do is actually introduce your children to certain concepts and certain ideas, maybe to a new piece, and then to get fluent in that idea, to get fluent in the execution or the speaking of that of that piece, if you like, there needs to be a lot of practice. Now, how does that work in real terms? If you have a small child who's just starting to learn to play an instrument, one of the challenges obviously is their ability to focus for any length of time. So what does practice look like for that child, for example? Well, for all learners of whatever age, there are 6 key areas that they need to kind of practice on a regular basis. You have the pieces, which is the most obvious. But even with the pieces, once they've started learning for maybe a few weeks and they've done a few lessons, you will find that they have old pieces that they've gone over and they have new pieces that they're learning. So even pieces alone, that's 2 areas of practice. They need to practice some of their old pieces so that they remember them and they don't become stale. They also need to work on their new pieces. That's 2 areas. And then you look at their skills, their scales rather, the technique, playing different scales. The reason that we need to play scales is because we're learning finger dexterity, where it's a piano, for example, and you're learning how keys relate to one another. So scales are the 3rd area of practice. Another area is theory. A lot of children that have lessons with us will have a theory workbook where they're learning how to read music, they're learning how music is expressed on paper, how to interpret the symbols on a page, and all of that also, like learning to write a language, needs some practice. So that's area number 4. And then you're looking at listening skills, where a child is learning particularly music that is not necessarily heard readily in their culture. So for example, those of us in traditional African countries that are learning Western style music, for example, we don't hear a lot of classical music all around us, except our parents or people close to us are fastidious listeners to classical music. Otherwise, they're really actually not something that we come across a lot. And so if a child is learning to play Western classical music, it's probably a good idea for them to listen to that style of music in between the lessons. And that could be as simple as listening to pieces that they're going to learn to play, or even the pieces that they're playing already. There are hundreds of recordings that you can get free access to, whether it's on YouTube or perhaps on one of the music streaming services, Spotify or Google Music or whatever it is that you use. There's somewhere that you can find recordings of music in a range of styles that your child can listen to, but then also listen actively, listen for nuances in the music, listen for changes in dynamics. Does it get loud in certain places? Does it get quiet? That kind of thing. So that's a 5th area. And then also we're looking at music games. You wouldn't think of it, but there are actually a range of games that we apply in our lessons that help children get to grips with some of the building blocks of music, with some of the skills that they need. It's a little bit like learning your times tables. You kind of like need to engage with that several times over and over again. And by using games, it makes that repetitive process a bit more interesting for the children. It gives them the willingness to kind of keep going. You know, there's a lot of self-motivation built into these games, and they're trying to beat your previous score or beat the next person in the league. So playing music games is another area that they need to practice. So to recap, if a child needs to practice, they need to practice their old music, they need to practice new music, they need to practice their scales, they need to do some listening skills, they need to practice their theory, and last of all, they also need to do some musical games. So that's 6 areas of practice. Now, how in the world are you going to fit that in with homework and clubs and, you know, all of the things that they have to do? Well, it is a challenge, and what we would like to recommend is that depending on a child's stage of learning, then the number of minutes, if you like, the amount of time needed will vary. So a new beginner, a little child who's perhaps under 5, perhaps maybe you limit that to 10 to 15 minutes a day. And what you would then do is focus on one activity per practice session. So for example, you might decide that, okay, Mondays, we're going to do just your old music. Tuesdays, we'll look at your new music. Wednesdays, let's do some scales. Thursday, we'll do some theory. Friday, we'll do some listening activities. Saturday, we'll play your music games on the iPad or on the computer. So that's a nice way of structuring it for little children. However, if your child is a little bit older and perhaps is working towards sitting a music exam, 10 minutes a day is not going to cut it. And so depending on the child's stage of learning, they will need longer. So let's say, for example, someone is preparing to sit an international music exam at grade 2, perhaps. I would say that that child needs at least 30 to 40 minutes of practice a day. Now, how in the world is that going to happen? It's not going to happen in one stretch. Forget it. What you probably need to do is break that down into perhaps 2 or 3 segments in the course of the day. The best time for practice, the best and easiest time for practice, a lot of parents find it's first thing in the morning before they head out of the door to school. You say, go and sit on that piano, or go and pick up your instrument, and for the next 20 minutes, go and practice. And then what you can do is still use those 6 areas, but then each segment of practice focuses on a different area. So maybe in the morning for the first 20 minutes, they will look at their old music, and then when they come back before they go to bed, after they've done homework, after they've chilled out a little bit, maybe have another 20 minutes where they're looking at the new music, or they're looking at piece A in the morning and then piece B in the afternoon. There's lots of different ways of structuring it. And what we've done is we've put together this very handy guide. It's called Practice Tips for Busy Parents. It's only 2 sides of an A4, and in it we have an example of a schedule that you might want to adopt for your child, and we've also got a link where you can download a blank schedule that would help you to create your own practice schedules at home. There's also tips on how do you work out what to do at any point in time. You can turn into a bit of a game maybe. Get a die. We've got 6 areas of practice. You say to your child, okay, these are the 6 areas on your list. Throw your dice. If you throw number 3, let's say number 3 skills. Okay, so today you're going to do skills, or in this segment of your practice today, you're going to do skills, and you cross that off. Your child practices the skills, and they can see for themselves as a visual element to them, knowing that, okay, I'm making progress. I've covered all these areas. And guess what? If you're able to get your practice in, or your child's practice in on a regular basis, even if you can't do every day, if you can do 3 days a week, I tell you, the difference in the progress that your child will make will be phenomenal, because your child is not going to be coming to the material completely fresh every time. You know, by the time they come to it again with their teacher, the teacher is able to say, oh, you are secure. You're secure in this particular aspect of your knowledge, so now we can move on to something else. But if your child doesn't practice, guess what? Every time they come to their lesson, it's almost like they're hearing it for the first time. They're hearing those concepts for the first time, and they're having to relearn it over and over again, and that the rate of progress is a lot slower. We find that the most successful children are those who are able to get into a habit of a nice practice routine. They cannot do it without your help, and so we hope that this guide is going to be a great help to you. Please click on the link in the bottom of this video, and I hope that you'll find that useful in helping your children to practice. Thank you so much for your time.